Guys, they didn't tell me that I was following a baptism. That's pretty amazing. So I'm going to hook up my computer here. I'm so excited to be here, guys. I love these kind of events, and I don't get to go to them often because my life has been a little crazy in the last couple of years. So anytime I get the opportunity to do it, I love to come. So this is I don't know if my computer's connected. Is it connected, guys? You got it? This is my family. I live in Franklin, Tennessee with my wife, Abby, and my son, Hugo. That is probably the stillest picture we could find of Hugo. But I wanted to talk, to take you down a little bit memory lane and open up with a funny story, or I guess you guys will determine if it's funny or not. When I was 15 years old, I actually, I was a huge film nerd, huge Christian film nerd, so little known fact about me, I could tell you pretty much anything about every Christian movie ever made. It's pretty nerdy. But I was obsessed with VeggieTales, so I convinced my parents to fly me to Franklin, Tennessee, where VeggieTales was headquartered, because in my 15-year-old mind, and I don't know why my parents went around with it, but I thought if I could just show up there and present myself, that they would welcome me in and I would work for them or something. I don't know what my plan was. So I got to VeggieTales. They were a little like, really? You flew all the way here? Great, wonderful. And I learned, through that experience that VeggieTales had actually kind of changed course, and it had folded, and it was no longer run by Phil and Mike, the Bob and Larry of the whole organization. I was kind of, crushed, and they're like, well, you should read this book. Phil wrote about it. So I read this book, Me, Myself, and Bob, which is a great book. If you've not read it, get a copy. It's an incredible book, especially for working in this space. I feel like it's a fantastic read. And so I read that, and then I was like, okay, now I know my mission. I have to go find Phil and pitch myself to him. So at 16, I convinced my parents to let me go to some seminar where Phil was speaking. And I did the thing you're really never supposed to do. I went up to him, waited in line, and was like, I would like to work for you, And he was like, that's great, here's an email address. And we never got to work together at that point, and I was kind of devastated. But I learned a couple things through that experience, and eventually I got a call from a guy named John Irwin, and he wanted me to come be a PA on his first feature film, which is a film called October Baby. We produced about 12, 13 years ago, I think. Ashley would probably know. So it was an amazing experience, and I finally got my shot to kind of to start in this industry. So I've got to preside over, to really oversee a lot of different incredible projects over the years, actually more than are even on the screen, but these were ones that I was a producer on with John and Andy, and I wanted to kind of talk you through some things I've learned on these movies along the way. Little side note, God has an interesting sense of humor, so I, of course, pitched Phil. It went terribly wrong. He was just kind of like, what do I do with this eager 16-year-old kid? And he gave me an email address for someone that I corresponded with. Did not work out. I could teach a whole lecture on how not to pitch yourself, because I would have done it all wrong. But God does have a funny sense of humor. After a movie we did called I Can Only Imagine that was quite successful, we ended up moving to Franklin, Tennessee, where VeggieTales was, and their headquarters was for a while. And we moved into the VeggieTales building. So the vision was somewhat correct. I was going to work for VeggieTales. I was going to work in the building that was VeggieTales. And then I actually did have a very funny moment when I had met Phil again, did not tell him that I was that 16-year-old kid that flew up to Franklin, Tennessee and pitched myself to him, because that would have been uncomfortable. And we kind of had a little exchange. It was nice. And then when I Can Only Imagine came out, he sent me an email and was like, hey, I would love to pick your brain about some things and talk about, I was a little wanted to be like, oh, I tried to work for you back in the day. But no, we've become actually good friends, and I've learned so much from just the story of VeggieTales. I think it's important to learn from the people that have gone in front of us, and VeggieTales pioneered a lot of the way. So very funny note, we did actually work in the back, like to this day, if you're in Franklin and you put in Big Idea, that's the offices of Kingdom Story Company. So John Irwin had reached out to me, and I became a PA on this film, and I learned so much from that experience, and really for me, the last 10 years, I kind of think back on in terms of films. It's just how my mind works, because I've put so much of my soul and life into these things, or I kind of measure time by them. So I wanted to talk today about some of my key learnings from 3 films. I've presided over about 20 different feature films in my cycle at Kingdom Story Company. Had an incredible experience. Owe so much of my career to John and Andy Irwin, who are such talented, amazing filmmakers, and Kevin Downs, who honestly owe a lot of their career to guys like Stephen and Alex Kendrick and the guys that came before them. So I wanted to talk about a couple lessons I've learned, but kind of this overarching idea of service. I think so many of us, especially young 16-year-old Josh, thought that you would kind of start out and have this moment where Gandalf comes to you and tells you, like, you've arrived, this is your destiny, this is how it's going to go, and hands you a lightsaber and so on. But it did not happen that way for me, and I don't think that's the way it usually works. Usually it's a process, and it's a journey. So I wanted to talk about some things I've learned at different key points along that journey, and I want to talk a lot about this idea of service, because I think so many of us want to immediately become the head of something, the producer, the director, and I think in some ways that can shortchange your experience. And I've learned a ton throughout the years by serving some very gifted leaders and getting to serve in the process and learn a lot in the process. So I had this scripture verse. I always try to bring it back to, and it's not going to be nearly as deep, I'm sure, as Stephen or Alex talking, so set your expectations low. But I love this scripture verse, but whoever would be great among you must be a servant, and whoever would be first among you must be a slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. That I felt like was the most applicable verse to kind of talk through some of these lessons I've learned in serving. Because oftentimes, again, especially in this industry that is a very me-first kind of industry, having a service mindset will I think, distinguish you amongst your peers and people that you work with. So October Baby, 2012. I actually saw some people here. Ashley, I think you were with Provident maybe during that period of time. We worked together. So neat to see. I love these festivals because you can see all these people. I did not animate my slides because it actually helps me because I'm a little ADHD to actually see my next point. But I wanted to talk about this idea of adding value. So when I first started on this process, again, it was very exciting to be on a film set. I'd gotten the opportunity to work with these filmmaker brothers that were so talented. They were doing all these music videos and documentaries, and I just thought these guys were the coolest guys. So I got an opportunity to be on this film set. I was about 19 years old, and I immediately was able to figure out the situation. There was problems everywhere. A film set is a problem factory. You know, because if you think about it, you're taking like a whole company and you're shoving it through like 6 weeks of time, and so all the problems happen very quickly. So one of the first lessons I learned on that film set was, man, and in life, and is kind of a mantra for me, is, man, look for ways to add value. And you might ask, okay, what are ways that I can bring value? To me, it's look for a need. You know, and on a film set especially, there's so many needs. Companies, churches, there's anywhere you're working, I feel like you can apply this idea of adding value. So look for those things. One of the things that I feel like, and again, I did these things very poorly and still struggle with them at times, but a posture of service. I think you come into that environment and you see all these important people, or you see these things, and you want to kind of step up to it. But honestly, one of the best things you can really do is have a service mentality, because the leaders will notice that. So this posture of service, I love the quote by Zig Ziglar. It says, it's your attitude, not your aptitude, that will determine your altitude. So that's basically the NIV version of that is, if you work hard and have a good attitude, you'll go far. You know, and I think that's such a thing, man. I really dislike a lot of the cultures of film sets, and that's something that I noticed immediately as I started. Attitude is a huge problem on film sets. There's a lot of kind of tribalism on sets of departments and things, and there's a lot of cocky attitudes when you get on a film set. And so one of the things that I feel like, man, as Christians, we should have great attitudes, and that you will stand out. If you're adding value, looking for the need, and have a good attitude, those are the things that are so needed on a film set. Every time I work on a film set and I see someone who has a good attitude, that we always talk about that. It's such a big thing. So I just encourage you guys, even if you're a seasoned, look for ways to bring value and have a posture of service. And I've tried to have that throughout my entire career at every stage. Do what no one else wants to do. And this is a key part of my story. So when I joined Irwin Brothers for this film, October Baby. I was a PA, and I was learning a lot. This was my first time I was ever on a film set. And through the conversations of hearing people talk through problems, and I was just kind of serving the production unit, and I actually gripped for a little while on it, which was a bad idea. I'm not good at that. I'd overheard a need for a big scene at the end of the movie where they needed to fill it full of people. And how many of you guys have worked on a film set before? Let me get okay, so you guys have experience. You probably know that the most desired job on a film set is not to be the extras coordinator. It is just a very difficult job. But oftentimes, the opportunities are in the unglamorous tasks. So I saw a need on October Baby for that, and you know what? That's always been something that I've been drawn to. I love to figure out how to get people to stuff. I love people. I love organizing it. So I didn't know that wasn't a glamorous job at the time. I thought it was kind of cool. So there was a big scene at the end of the movie that I worked really, really hard on. It's not as difficult as you'd think to get a crowd in Alabama to come out for a movie. It's fun, right? I learned that very quickly. It's fun to get people to stuff. And then we had John Schneider in it, and he was like a big deal in Alabama because he was Bo Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard. So people were all about it. So I worked really I worked really hard for many weeks to kind of fill this scene. And it was probably an auditorium around this size. We filled it up full of people. And it was something that I was able to contribute. I was able to bring value to the production, and John and Andy saw that. They saw that my work ethic on it, and they decided to hire me to come on full time with them and be a part of their company. And to this day, this is a funny fact, on every movie I've been a part of, I just produced a movie, two movies last year, and in some capacity, I'm still the guy that helps with the extras thing. So it never leaves you, but it's a point that I always try to reinforce to people, because we oftentimes want the job that everybody kind of wants. But the opportunity sometimes is doing the job that nobody else wants to do. And in some ways, it was humbling for me to work through all these films and do that job. But man, it was my route to getting to where I am today was by serving in that way, even in a way that was not the most desired job. So I would just encourage you, man, look for value that you can bring. Do the unglamorous things and do it with a good attitude. And that's a big part of what I look for when we're hiring people. It's a big part of what I try to still do in every aspect of my job today. So I learned those lessons on October Baby. It was from there I got hired full-time. I didn't really even know what I was. I was 19 years old. They gave me a producer credit on October Baby, which I didn't even really know what that meant, but I was excited to have it. And I told everybody I was a producer, and they laughed at me most of the time because I really did not know what I was doing. But I had this incredible opportunity to grow with these guys, these two brothers that were making films. This was their first film, and I got to work on it with them. And so we went on from there to form a company called Irwin Brothers Entertainment and produced many different kinds of movies. And in my breakout tomorrow, I'll go into some of the detail of how we made those films. But we made these amazing films and that I'm so proud of. And we got to this point where we were going to really step out and we took a big swing at things. And this brings me, this next film I'm going to talk about kind of gets to a difficult season. So October Baby was kind of where we started. Woodlawn, I don't know if you guys have seen that film. I'm very proud of it. Amazing crew that worked on it. One of the most painful experiences, though, for a lot of the people that worked on it and marketed it. And I want to talk to you about that and what we learned through that experience. But I wanted to start with this scripture verse. Do you see a man that's skillful in his work? Oh, well, this is to kind of finish off this point. Is the idea of if you're adding value, service, doing the things that nobody else wants to do. You see a man who's skillful in his work, he will stand before kings, he will not stand before obscure men. And I really do believe that's true. And I think anybody here that has had any success in these projects could tell you, like, man, when someone it doesn't matter what they're good at, if they're the sound guy, if they're the costume person, I think Terry's in here somewhere, incredible talent, you will be elevated in whatever you're working on. So I thought that was a good scripture verse to end that point. So Woodlawn, I want to talk about this project. Very proud of this movie, but it was a very difficult life lesson for everyone involved. At this point in the company, I had moved on to this position of instead of being kind of a servant and kind of just the mid-level guy that was serving the Irwins, I kind of stepped into a leadership role, which I was very excited about. So this movie really, for me, represents a turning point in my career and in my life. but it was also a turning point for us as a company and in our story. We were very ambitious with this film. This was the most expensive film the Irwins had done to that point. And we got caught in a lot of, I think, a common trap of this industry and just people. We got a little full of ourselves. And we were really confident this was going to be the most successful Christian film ever made, and that we were making a real film. And so we were not serving, and this is kind of, I want to, service is kind of a through line through my talk tonight. And when I started, I was learning just to serve others, that in front of me, the leaders of the film crew or the department heads. This season was really a season that taught me, John, and Andy about how to serve the people underneath you, which is another big aspect, I feel like, of leadership and serving. Serving with humility, there's so much you could get into there, but it was an issue on our film set. We were driving people really hard. Our culture was not great. We were driving people really hard. We were managing it and leading it pretty poorly because of the stress that we were under. And I'll tell you this, the other side of a film set, if you ever worked on one, they are stress incubators, So you really see people's cracks and their flaws, and mine included, when you get into that environment. It really is a pressure cooker situation. And what tends to happen in those environments is things tend to go sideways. It's going to happen. I've never been on a film set, even the most perfectly run and well-led, that something didn't break. Again, that's where the opportunities are as well. But oftentimes what starts to happen is people start to blame each other. If they start to kind of pick at each other, they start to shoot each other, they start to attack people rather than problems, which is what you should be doing in that situation. So I learned that life lesson poorly. Our crew is, and it starts at the top usually on a film set. From the top, we were not leading well. We were attacking each other. It got very toxic. The film turned out well, but the ends don't justify the means in that situation. So I just encourage you guys, as you step into leading, lead with humility, and it's hard to do that. A big part of that, I think, is unity, and I'll touch on that in my next kind of part of this talk. People are more important than the process, especially as Christians getting into this. How we treat our crew is so important, and I've not always done this well. Admittedly, I've done this poorly at times. But man, what an opportunity. I mean, you're going to be working on film sets full of unbelievers. So as believers, it is such an opportunity to pass on the testimony and really encourage someone in the right or the wrong direction. I've met a lot of people that have worked on film crews that had negative experiences. And that, to me, that always makes me very sad, because as Christians, man, this is the first line of defense. I always say that it's kind of a triple bottom line approach to these projects, which is you can impact, the first ministry really that you have is to your crew. And there are a lot of ways I could get into about how you serve your crew well. Not working them hours that are insane, that they're away from their family, and burning them out. That's not a great way to lead. And I've worked on projects that have done that, and it's something that I'm really trying to do better at on future projects. It happens. At times you're going to have stressful, long days that you have to get the job done. But there's a way to plan and to do that better. Taking moments to love on people. This is the way that you do things differently as Christian filmmakers. We shouldn't learn all that. There's amazing things to learn from the craft of filmmaking from the world and how they do things, but we should do it differently. And so we learned that lesson the hard way on Woodlawn, and I think John, Andy, myself, and any of the leaders involved would tell you that. Oftentimes, I believe, the process of making a film kind of bleeds over into the marketing and ultimately kind of how the film does. It's a weird, funny thing. I've heard people say if you're not having fun, it's going to show up on screen, but ultimately I think you set a tone kind of spiritually for the process of the life cycle of this entire film, from concept to screen in the production phase. And that's why it's really important, and I could talk for hours about ways to do that well and ways I've learned, and I've learned a lot from Steve and Alex and guys like that have poured into our lives and really gave us ideas and principles. I mean, one thing that I really I love is starting your day on a film set in prayer. If you can't get the whole crew, which is the best way to do it at least as the producers and the leaders of the film set coming together on a daily basis and doing that, is such a productive thing, even though you're just fighting time constantly, because it does a couple things. When you come together in prayer, it unifies you guys, which there's a lot of tension on those film sets, but when you come together and you're praying together, it's a humbling thing, it's a unifying thing, and it really resets the day, and it allows you to start with a posture of service towards the Lord and service towards your crew and service towards each other. So it's something that I really think I'll never do a movie without it. So we finished Woodlawn. It was one of those films that you talk about, that you survived kind of Woodlawn. And battle scars that to this day, I meet people that worked on it, and again, there's some that had a positive experience, some it was a very difficult experience. And I think for John and Andy, it was very difficult for them, it was very difficult for the leaders. It was a hard movie. It was a bigger budget film. It was about a $13 million production budget. The film we had done before that was about a $5 million production budget. So that jump is astronomical, to the scale and the size. And so if you have problems on a $5 million production budget where things are getting jammed through, you can only imagine that you don't have much more time, but you have a lot more expensive problems. I remember a line producer telling me, a really smart line producer, a guy named Daryl, was breaking down for me how expensive 10 minutes of delay was. It was like $15,000 or $20,000, and it gave me like acid reflux because I was trying to figure out how to fill a whole auditorium full of people. I'm like, it's gonna take time, we're gonna figure out, so it's stressful. Because again, it's just a scarce amount of time. So that film really, it ended, we got the film in the can, the film was looking good, it was working, but as we went out to market it, kind of that attitude kind of came back for us of, hey, we're making the best Christian film ever made, the biggest, it's gonna be the most successful, and we were really boasting a lot about that. And honestly, it didn't do as well as we wanted it to. A movie can make a certain amount in box office, you might say, that sounds great, it's made millions of dollars, but it really matters how much you spent on the thing. So the film did about $14.5 million in box office, which was the most amount of box office we had made to that point, but we had spent much more than that to make and market the film. So it was kind of, for us, for our investors, for our distributors, it was kind of a perceived failure. And so we went through this kind of dark night of the soul as a company, which was needed, that I really believe God humbled us. And I wasn't going to share this story, but I think it actually is helpful for this room. We had a really neat moment that I think if you asked the Irwins, they would tell you was impactful for them too. So we had just finished the campaign. We worked really hard. I mean, sometimes marketing a film is more difficult than making a film. And we had spent better part of a year really pounding the pavement trying to market this film. And then it was kind of a letdown. And there's nothing kind of sadder than when a movie doesn't perform at the box office, because it's not like you can go out and get your friends to go see it, because you need millions of people to go out to see a film. So you're kind of in bad shape unless something miraculous happens. And so we had this humbling kind of season post-Woodlawn, and someone invited us to a breakout, kind of some sort of gathering at NRB where the Kendricks were there, who had just come off of War Room, and that movie had grossed $60 million in the box office. And we, and I think John, Andy, and myself, and everyone would tell you during that time, there was a lot of comparison kind of thinking, we're gonna be bigger than the Kendricks, we're gonna show them because we made a huge epic film and all this stuff, and they just crushed us when it came to box office. We were thinking to ourselves, man, so we went to this event, and it was a really special event. The Kendricks, it was just a room of 4 or 5 people, filmmakers from different parts of the faith film community, John, Andy, myself, and the Kendricks took a whole day out just to talk about what they have learned throughout the years. And then the Kendricks tend to do this. They're very spirit-led guys, so it was kind of straight to us. Because it was they were talking about how, the process that a lot of filmmakers go through that they've noticed. And they weren't, they were being had a lot of grace and love in the way that they communicated it, but they talked about how people would start, and they would tout that they were making a real movie, not one of these Christian movies, and then they would, spend all this money making the film and really have this boastful marketing campaign, then the movie would fail, and they'd blame marketing, which was pretty much what we had just done on Woodlawn. So we were kind of sitting there oh. And so we had this, we were at the time, we were living in Birmingham, Alabama, so I think NRB was in Nashville, and we were driving back. We had this long, kind of awkward drive back. And we were, we were thinking through that, and we really came to the conclusion, man, if we had won on Woodlawn like they had won on War Room, we would not have been in that room taken the time to really share with these guys. And so that humility that they had was really humbling to us. And so we started to have conversations about how we can do better on the film set. We were kind of having conversations like, if we get the opportunity to do better, because we weren't sure we were going to be able to make another movie at that point, which is a thing. When you have a movie that is a perceived failure, it's hard at times to get another production up and running. So we started one of the most, I think it was one of the sweetest seasons of my time with John and Andy and the Irwins and Kevin. It was a very humble time. We really said, okay, what is the next project we want to do? And we wanted to do a movie called I Can Only Imagine. So we didn't have any financing dollars to even to write the script. But we said, you know what, we have time, let's write this, let's get it right. And when we come to the production stage and the marketing stage, let's do it differently. Let's do it the way like we really feel called to do these kinds of things. Let's learn from these guys that have been around us. And that's kind of the next film I wanted to talk about, because I really had these 3 films throughout my time that really changed me a lot. This quote from Me, Myself, and Bob, again, I can't recommend that book enough. Especially if you're getting into media of any kind, as a director, a producer, an executive, I think there's so many things to learn. But Phil said this, and this really encompasses kind of where we got to post-Woodlawn. He said, I believed I could change the world, which we did. And the weight of that belief almost crushed us. Well, me, but us, in this equation, because we were carrying that, and it was a very difficult season to kind of walk afterwards. But guess what? Apart from God, I can do nothing. I can't get anywhere. My ability to accomplish anything good is dependent on my willingness to dwell in the current of God's will. And that was that book, in many times throughout John and Andy and my tenure together, was such like something that we went back to. And honestly, I told that to Phil. I said, man, that book has changed, I think, a lot of people that work in this industry's life, and he liked that when I told him. But this was really kind of the season we went through, which we realized, you know what, you can get, the scripture verse of, you can get up and work in the morning, work in the afternoon, work at night. God might bless all 3 of them. Might choose to bless one of them. And we really got to that place. We said, you know what, we're going to bring our 2 loaves and fishes and see if God blesses this thing, but we're not going to make it all about ourselves. We're going to focus on the film. We're going to focus on the craft of it. We're going to focus on the message, the impact, and we're not going to go out there and tell everyone this is going to be the biggest thing. In fact, we didn't have enough. We were not given a budget like we were on Woodlawn because we really couldn't justify it, and there was a lot of skepticism even when we went out. But we went out with a posture of humility, even when we were fundraising, saying, "Hey, we know we just had a film that was not financially successful, but this is what we've learned, going into it," which leads me kind of into this next slide. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Learn from your mistakes. Like the definition of insanity is repeating them over and over again. And I do believe that it is a really wise thing to take time after a failure, and in particular after a victory, to really assess what worked and didn't work. Victory or a perceived win sometimes can be a terrible teacher, because you just kind of move on, and you start to believe everything you did really worked well. I can only imagine we looked at Woodlawn, and we very practically and even spiritually what worked and what didn't. The way that we operated on set did not work. So we had to go back to the drawing board and have some really humbling conversations with crew members about the way they were treated. They weren't heard, they weren't respected, their time wasn't valued, and we had to kind of eat some humble pie there and say, how do we do this differently? Some of that was finding the right department heads to lead different divisions of that film. Some of it was really us and how we were treating people and how we were operating. We had stopped at some point really having a spiritual emphasis on set, which very easily can happen even on faith films. And then the tyranny of the urgent tends to take over. And you're just, what's the next thing to do? And that can really crush what God's trying to do in your life on a film set. So we had to kind of we're not going to screw that up again. So we actually coordinated every day. We had a different speaker come in and pray with us and do a devotional. And some days it was very hard to do because we were running behind and we were like, oh no, we can't do this today. But every single time we had someone come in we felt like the Lord kind of come in and bless it. I really believe in the power of unity. I'm kind of going to jump back and forth between these two things, but I really believe that God blesses teams that have a spirit of unity. And, this is where two or more are gathered. And that film set, we started with a spirit of unity. We were in prayer about this film every step of the way. We had a posture of, if God's going to use us through this film to impact our crew, an audience, so be it. If he chooses not to, so be it. We're going to do our part. We're going to work very hard. We're going to make the best film possible, but the results are up to God. And that attitude, because from day one on the film set. And I think the neat opportunity we had on that one is we got to work with a lot of the same people that we worked with on Woodlawn. So they got to kind of see the process change and heal kind of with us. But we did also learn some practical mistakes on that film. We spent too much. It was probably too big of a movie for us to do that quickly. We probably were not ready for that level of film. It's good to be stretched. Sometimes it's not good to go too far. We learned a lot of things even in the marketing, which I could go out more into in my breakout tomorrow. But we learned, the name Woodlawn didn't really mean too much to anybody, so it didn't help us anyway. It wasn't the only problem. We learned that we had a very B2B strategy with marketing, but we really didn't communicate to an audience what this movie was and why it was just a good film, was a good football film. So we learned a lot on that. So we really took time to study what worked. And I would really encourage you, if you guys have a successful project, take time to study it, because the tendency is just to move right on by, and it's good to learn even from success. So the power of unity, I spoke on that. I just really believe that, I wouldn't do a film if I wouldn't do a film without unity, especially in whatever team you're working on. I remember speaking with Stephen and kind of consulting with him going into Jesus Revolution, because this was my first kind of stepping out of the box, doing a feature on my own. I'd been a producer on a lot of the projects with John and Andy, but my role was really, operations and business and managing that side of it. This was the first time I was stepping into a leadership role. And he was the one that encouraged me to say, man, be unified with those producers. Fight each other, yell at each other, but work those problems out as a family, and don't stab them in the back. Don't shoot them in the back, shoot them, and it's so, the tendency's there, trust me. And even for me, I'm sure there was many times on Jesus Revolution where Kevin or Daryl or John or Andy could have shot me for doing something stupid, which I did plenty of stupid things, because it was my first time kind of producing a big movie. Luckily, I had training wheels with Kevin and Daryl, because they're such experienced producers. But yeah, that spirit of unity, I can't speak enough about it. And I think that comes from humility and a spirit of how do you serve each other, serving the directors and serving the crew and serving ultimately the audience. So man, I just encourage you, before you kind of get into the war that is making a movie, to make sure you are unified. I also want to talk on the gift of limitation, because you hear a lot about budget when you're making a film or planning a film. But I love that Orson Welles quote, "The enemy of art is the absence of limitation." Throughout the entire process, I have never worked on a single movie that had enough money to make itself. Even the biggest budget, I got to work a tiny bit on American Underdog, which was the biggest budget film that the Irwins had produced at the time, and they were having the same problems. Like, it doesn't matter. I've worked on films that were in the 20 million budget range down to like 600,000, and it seemed like it was the same conversations. It was just more time. But I actually really think there's a gift in limitation on Jesus. And I can only imagine we didn't have a huge budget because we couldn't have a big budget. So we had to get very creative. And I think that creative problem solving is where I think it's a gift. So anytime people come to me and ask me about, okay, how do I get my budgets bigger? I'm always saying, hey man, be faithful with a little, you'll be faithful with a lot. So that is so true in film, because if you can make a $600,000 movie, which October Baby wasn't much more than, make it look amazing, get the acting right, then someone will trust you probably with a $5 million budget, and so on. So we had a lot of limitation in our marketing, in our production, the whole process. And it's so interesting. At the end of it, I was reflecting back after I Can Only Imagine came out. It was an incredible success story. It was an incredible underdog story, because opening weekend it was poised by the trades to make $2 to $3 million potentially. It went on to make $86 million in gross box office. But I remember thinking back on Woodlawn, and we did all the same things. we did the same. We had the same, marketing teams. We did this. We played both playbooks, and God chose to bless this instead of that. And it just was something that it was kind of eye-opening to me. It's like, you know what, we can do that work, but ultimately God's got to bless it. It's got to be the right timing. So it is. We actually had less money even on I Can Only Imagine than Woodlawn. So it was a very interesting comparison on that. So I encourage you guys that, you know what, you're going to have limitations in all your projects. And so thinking of it like, hey, this is the box, let's make it work. I always encourage people on. Did that switch over? Yeah. So one of the other parts of serving that I'm really passionate about. So starting my journey, I talked about how do you serve the people in front of you, your bosses, your producers, your crew, your crew. Ultimately, moving on to leadership, how do you serve the people underneath you? That idea of service throughout that. But another part of serving that I feel like is overlooked most of the time in these conversations is serving your audience. It's a big part of serving. I always in some ways, they're our bosses. They're the ones that show up and buy our product and support us. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. I could probably talk for hours about this, but I won't because I have 7 minutes. The 10,000 hour rule, if John Irwin was here, he would tell it so much better and so much more interesting. But it's the Malcolm Gladwell principle of basically whatever you spend 10,000 hours doing, you'll probably become an expert in, right? You've probably heard this analogy before. I love that analogy, and I think it's so true. I think oftentimes we spend, one of my big critiques is we oftentimes spend like 100 hours here and 1,000 hours here and 400 hours here, and we don't actually really take the time to get to really learn a craft and become an expert. Man, I encourage you guys, become an expert in what you're doing because to me that's serving the audience, because the audience more and more these days is demanding a higher quality product. You guys probably know that. It's just faith film has gotten really good. I've seen a lot of these movies and I'm blown away. When Alex and Steven started, they were like some of the pioneers. There really was nobody else making these things. So there wasn't a lot of competition. They would tell you now, man, there's so many talented filmmakers. I could tell you about a dozen guys that are just incredibly talented, and the audience has come to expect it, and they can sense it when it's not well done. So I encourage you guys, man, work on your craft. Get really good at something. This is how we serve our audience, is by making a great product. So I am just a big believer in, instead of maybe jumping to make your first feature before you're ready, take time and serve somebody else's vision. Get good at your craft, because one of the big things I learned through the years of kind of serving in various unglamorous roles was I got to listen to the problems from these different department heads and issues. And when I got put into a position of leadership, especially when I was like the solo leader on a film as a producer and didn't have as many of the guys I had worked with, it served me so well because I remembered the issues that people had dealt with throughout the years that I would hear and help them with, and it allowed me to kind of understand how I could serve them better. So I just encourage you guys, master your craft. It will serve the audience well, it will serve you well, and I believe it's serving the Lord well. This is a big topic. This might be a hot topic. We referred to these films as chasm films, me and John. And the idea was that in the effort of bridging a gap or trying to please too many people, you end up pleasing no one. And so you end up in this chasm of films. This is something I encourage you guys on. I don't mean to be condescending in this. I've been a part of projects that have not worked. So this is not picking on any particular films, but it's more of just encouraging you to understand really what kinds of films and what kinds of stories you're telling. I find that there's a category of us, mostly it's Christians that have come out of, like myself, Christian conservative backgrounds, who are trying to push your films further and in an effort to please the wrong people, we tend to make these films that please really no one, because honestly, like I'll kind of explain this a little bit. I've heard throughout my entire career, I've heard people say, "Why don't you guys use more bad language in your films? Why don't you put that in it? It's gritty, it's real. Why don't you show gratuitous violence, or or sexuality in some capacity. This is life, this is real. That is a movie for no one, because honestly, the audience that is going to movies for that isn't interested in your film. They would just go see the secular equivalent to that film. And the faith audience will be offended by it, so you won't have any champions of your product. And I could go much further, that I'm going to in a second, that you're also causing your audience to stumble, you're also not serving the Lord well. But I would say just watch out for that, because I think you end up making just a movie that you would want to see, truthfully. Which I know there's quotes that say, make a movie that you want to see, or really make movies for yourself. But in some ways, I think it's deceptive, because you wouldn't go see a Christian film with bad language and sexual content and stuff. You'd probably, if that's what's in your heart, you're probably just going to want to go see the secular film. So I just encourage you guys to really think about the films you're making. I'm not saying that you can't deal with difficult subjects. If you saw Jesus Revolution, we tackled some pretty difficult subjects of drug use, and we showcased sin. And that kind of leads me to this next point, and they're kind of tied together. Something I'm very passionate about, I've been a part of this faith film thing for about 12 years, is you have a responsibility as a content creator, as a producer, any part in the process. You have a responsibility on what you're communicating to your audience. I think sometimes people that watch these films don't realize how intentional every aspect of this film is. So you're communicating ideas to your audience. And if you're communicating bad ideas to your audience, you are not serving the audience well. I heard someone once refer to filmmaking as kind of like a shepherd, and in some capacity, the people that come and see your films are your flock. So you're feeding your flock bad content. You're doing a disservice to the Lord. You're doing a disservice to the audience. So I'd say just, this is why films, I think like the Kendricks have done a great job of teaching about this, just to how to be mindful about the content, what you're communicating, because you don't get to stop the movie and provide context to the crowd. You're communicating ideas to them. And I've been challenged and I've been discouraged at times by some faith films that have come out and the content they've chosen to put in there. And I don't mean to be controversial in that. It's just something I'm very passionate about, because I love this category of filmmaking. I love these filmmakers. I love this audience. I love the evangelistic potential of films to reach people. I also know with great power comes great responsibility. And when you're creating films, you are communicating very widely to people. So I would encourage you, and I would caution you to take time to really think about the ideas and the content that you're putting forth in the world, because we will be ultimately held responsible for that. I'm going to try to wrap this up, but this scripture verse came to me, and it oftentimes I think explains the secular Hollywood kind of world very well. Everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. That is film and Hollywood. The pride of life, the lust of the eyes. All those three things are what really encompasses the entertainment industry, and there's so many pitfalls. So this is my kind of final point. I wanted to talk about this transition I made, and I know I'm probably out of time, so I need to go quickly here, sorry. This is a mistake that they gave me the microphone, because I could talk for hours with you guys. I'm a huge nerd of this stuff. My final word to you kind of is one about my testimony and where I'm going now, and also kind of a word of caution. I love this world of filmmaking. I love the world of faith film, and that I can make an impact through the films that I get to work on. But I would caution you, it is not the healthiest industry to get into. I've seen some people really see their lives get destroyed by working at people that came in with the best of intentions. I heard someone once say, a film set is not a hospital, and that's very true. So if you're coming in a little sick, it's not the place to be. And I have a couple thoughts on that. Really, I always try to encourage young people that are coming in to know why you're in this business, and to remind yourself of that. Why are you getting into this? If it's to be famous, if it's to become wealthy, then this is probably not the correct festival for you, and there's probably better speakers that could talk to that. This industry, if you get into it, it's not this room. This room is kind of church. When you get out into the world and you're working on these films, you're going to be exposed to people and a business that does not share your beliefs, and that's okay. You can utilize those mechanisms to get the gospel far and wide, like Jesus Revolution, but it is also it's a tricky business to get into. So I'll just say, salt that loses its savor isn't effective. And as Christians, I just encourage you guys, before you step in this business, be prayerful about, is this the right business for me to step into? If it is, I always encourage people, find some mentors in your life that you can really rely on. Surround yourself, have accountability, and then just remind yourself in those moments, why did I get into this? And stick to that. One of the things that I have learned the most in the last 2 years have been a very interesting 2 years for me, and I'll wrap this up for you guys so you can go to dinner. Sometimes your career path when you're following the Lord doesn't make sense. And that's a hard thing for me because I'm a very practical guy. I like to be strategic about all of my career paths, the decisions I make, the films I work on, because this is such a business of comparison at times. But I felt the Lord calling me at the end of 21 to move on from working with John and Andy, which was really a death to a vision for me. I had really loved working with those guys. They were so impactful. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have worked on the movies without them taking a chance on me. But I felt like the Lord, for some reason, telling me it was time to move on and do things, to do something different. He didn't really tell me what it was. And I was really struggling with it. I actually had to sit down with Stephen, who's kind of become a mentor of mine, and I said, man, I don't know what's next, and I don't know what to do. And he encouraged me, he just said, follow the Lord. Like, what does the Lord require of you? And I'd say that's something I've learned. And how do you, in serving God with your careers, not asking what do I want, not asking what's the most strategic business decision to make, but what does the Lord require of me? And so I had this moment where it was really kind of gut-wrenching, where I left. Our company was doing really well. We had survived COVID. It seemed like everything was on the up. It wasn't the time to usually leave, but I felt like God telling me that. And I went through a kind of a dark night of the soul where I didn't really know, like I kind of made the decision. I felt like, oh God led me on this path, and then it was quiet, and I was kind of afraid because I was like, man, I don't know, I'm going to pay my mortgage, and I'm going to do these things. But I really felt a peace in it too, and it was very shortly after that. Stephen talks about the Irwins coming back. John came back to me and said, hey, man, you had shepherded this movie, Jesus Music, which dealt with a lot of the same themes of Jesus Revolution. Why don't you come back and independently produce for me on Jesus Revolution? And I had the opportunity to do that. And I also had the opportunity last year to produce with another group of brothers, the Smallbone brothers of the band for King and Country, a film called Unsung Hero, which is all about their family coming from Australia to the US, this incredible story. So at the end of this year, I was reflecting a lot of, man, this incredible year that I had where I took this not strategic leap of faith. I met with a mentor of mine, and I said, yeah, I quit my job. And he was like, oh, cool, what are you doing next? And I was like, I literally don't know. He was like, oh, yeah, you know. And I was like, no, I actually don't. It was a true leap of faith moment. I felt like that's what God was requiring of me, was to really take a leap of faith and not necessarily know where I was going to land, And sometimes God requires us to do things that don't make a lot of sense. But in hindsight, when I look back, you don't always get that hindsight immediately. But in hindsight, when I've looked back, I'm so grateful for that, for following God's kind of prompting in my life, because I got to produce on these incredible movies, bring them to the forefront and learn so many lessons throughout the process. So I will leave you with this. I am still a work in progress, by the way. I am still learning a lot. I'm very new to independently producing on my own. In a couple of years, I'll probably have another talk for you on what I've learned and all the mistakes I've made. But this is a verse that became real for me in the last 2 years, which is the idea of committing your work to the Lord and letting him establish your path. And I would just encourage you at this point in whatever endeavor you guys are in, just to do things differently, to follow God's prompting in your life instead of what makes sense. Just encourage you to look for opportunities to serve in whatever aspect you're in currently. If you're just starting out, or if you're a veteran, this is the ways we're going to stand out as faith content creators, and then follow the Lord's prompting in your lives. At least for me in my short career, it has been a very exciting journey, just following God's kind of prompting. So appreciate you guys. I'm around. I have a breakout tomorrow. I can get into more of the details of things, but I appreciate you guys, and I'm excited to see how this festival goes. So, thank you.